Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, depending on where you may be. My name is Gilberto Duarte, and I work at the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, specifically at the Education for Justice Initiative. I'm very happy to be here with you all today to talk about the rule of law and how it's been affected during the COVID pandemic, as well as what the future may hold and what we can do and collaborate on to address some of these challenges. So very briefly before I start, I'm sure that you're probably sick of hearing about how this has all been a very challenging period. It affects us physically and mentally. We can't go out. We are distant physically from other people, but we're still interacting and we're still socially active online. So it's a very interesting period of learning and adapting, and it doesn't come without its challenges. And part of the series is focused a lot on collaboration, which is extremely important for us to get over the pandemic, but it will also be extremely important after the pandemic. I want to start with the rule of law context. We often hear about the rule of law, but it's really not always easy to pinpoint what it is. The UN has a definition about the rule of law. If you're curious about it, you might want to go to un.org/rule of law, and you will find a more complex definition there. But basically, it refers to people, everyone, including the government and institutions, being accountable to the law. That law respecting human rights and protecting human rights and fundamental freedoms, as well as ensuring the capacity of people worldwide and in their different countries and at the local setting as well to collaborate and contribute to promoting the rule of law. So all of this is a little bit intertwined. Some of the elements we normally talk about the rule of law within UNODC relate to challenges to the rule of law. What are some of these challenges? Basically, they can be corruption, for example, or organized crime in its various forms. Let me just give you two examples. Trafficking in persons and smuggling of migrants are two very common examples of organized crime. Cybercrime is also very interesting, and throughout the pandemic we have seen an increase in cyber criminal activity, as well as terrorism and violent extremism or other threats such as violence against women or children, or or general violence in different settings. With the pandemic and different lockdown settings in different countries, the rule of law context changed a little bit. In general, you might think initially that crime has been more or less at a standstill. In fact, many people and in some governments actually celebrated the fact that homicides or murders were at an all-time low because people were just staying home. But the reality is that this also means that some of the rule of law challenges shifted towards the home environment. Gender-based violence and violence against children, everything that is happening within the domestic environment. But cyber criminals and organized criminal groups have also taken advantage of this to, for example, focus on disseminating malware and targeting people online. Cyberbullying has also spiked. Organized criminal groups are, for example, selling falsified medical products or equipment online, or you might hear about some miraculous cure to the coronavirus. It's all over the place, and in other situations, organized criminal groups have also taken advantage to increase their presence when the government has detracted a little bit. So we see a lot of shift happening right now. What is going to change after? The world will be at a very different scenario. We are going to be in a very serious economic downturn and economic crisis, which generates a number of different vulnerabilities. And where poverty tends to increase, the rule of law tends to go down. So these often go hand in hand, and this is one of the key elements of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So we might see an increase in criminal activity. For example, human trafficking often increase when people want to migrate in the seeking different opportunities. So this creates conditions where organized criminal groups can further engage in human trafficking. So that's just an example. Finally, how does collaboration come into play in all this? And this is one of the most interesting questions that, this series is focusing on. Number one, during the pandemic, I think it's important to stay alert. We often hear about, how this is an already challenging period. So we don't want rule of law challenges such as gender-based violence or violence against children, or falling victim to cybercrime, malware, or scams by organized criminal groups affecting us even more. So it's very important that we work with different authorities who have their own campaigns to work on this, as well as alert people about these things. We need to ensure that the news we get is trustworthy, and this works very much the same way in ensuring that people have access to adequate information about potential cyber threats, or how people are staying safe and avoiding falling prey to organized criminal groups. Another important element is to consider how to seek help and make sure that we are all trying to warn other people about how to seek help. So working together with different friends and families is important. Interestingly enough, cooperation is important because very seldom the threats come from the same place. So if you are in one country, an organized criminal group or a cyber criminal very easily will be at a different country. So alerting the authorities is extremely important because they can and will work together to bring this down. After the pandemic, the scenario will change significantly, and I think that we will have to work very closely with each other to stay alert and ensure that the situation that people are in is not further conducive to the flourishing of criminal activity and further challenges to the rule of law. And youth participation is extremely important because law enforcement and the government, they can't do it alone. Promoting the rule of law is something that the whole of society needs to be engaged. And this is one of the key elements of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Young people must be involved, they must participate, and Sustainable Development Goal 16 really cannot be attained without youth mobilization and activity. So this is the final message that I want to leave you with. How can we further collaborate with people who are not just around us, but in different places to promote the rule of law? It has changed during the pandemic. It will change again after this is over. And we have to find ways to collaborate further and constantly. So thank you very much.